Добрый день.
На видео вот так снимать.
Предоставляет доклад на тему корабли миры. Несколько слов о Джерри. Он является генеральным директором компании Commercial Space Technologies, является членом Совета британского межпланетного общества, и в свое время он участвовал в проекте «Видал», который рассматривал возможность межзвездных перелетов. Доклад будет происходить на английском языке, вопросы, ответы с переводом на русский. Вот,
Thank you. Because of time constraints, I'm going to speak in English, so that you've been warned, and I'm very sorry for that. But I will stop from time to time just for questions, 3 times during the talk. Just to, as Kostya said, I was part of the British Interplanetary Society Daedalus study, which was to show that Carl Sagan was talking about for $1 worth of electricity you could communicate with the stars, and why do you need to travel physically? And of course the reason is that anything out there could be evolved, and probably is evolved, from predators, and therefore is likely to eat us. It's better for us to go rather than wait until we're visited. And so we wanted to show that physical transport across interstellar distances was possible. This was the first try. The Worldships I'm going to talk about will be powered by similar propulsion. You asked to have a look at it. Just pass it round. Yeah, that's the final report of Project Daedalus, actually. So what I'm talking about is Worldships. And yeah, you can pass it around. In fact, you can buy it from the British Interplanetary Society. The report is still being sold. Okay, so I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about. This is about slide 10 in my talk. I'm actually going to go back to the beginning. This is 20% of the way in. But just to explain exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you who may have read, I hope he was translated into Russian, Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur Clarke, have the basic principles. We're talking about ships of kilometers long, tens of kilometers long, and wide. And my talk is to discuss, are they going to be built, why are they going to be built, and who would fund them? Where does the funding come from, and who would build them, and why? Myself, I am with the greats, Tsiolkovsky, Goddard, Bernal, the others, who actually saw that this type of transportation in mankind was inevitable as mankind expanded. Tsiolkovsky and Goddard saw these things as space arcs, as some way in which mankind could exit the solar system if there was some emergency with the sun or something. You know, that was the classic way. When you get to the great period of scientific communism, which was from the 20s right through to the 40s, there were writers in the West like J.D. Bernal who visualized world habitats as a natural expansion of mankind, kind of inevitable and natural expansion, part of the glorious progress outwards. So what I'm basing on is the fact, as a follow-up, sorry, wrong way, as a follow-up to Project Daedalus, there was some look at worldship designs based on the Daedalus propulsion system, and after several pieces of work by a man called Bond, Alan Bond, and another man called Tony Martin, these were the final results, and I believe they're definitive. So I believe that if you live on a planet which is the size of the Earth and has an oxygen atmosphere, anywhere in the galaxy, you will build worldships of this size and shape. The reason you'll do that is just simple engineering principles. other civilizations who are on different gravities will build different sizes to simulate. Why am I telling you this? That's because, sorry, wrong way, let's go back. If we look at the, this is the radius of the ship and this is hull thickness. And you'll find that on the curve, based on making the structure out of steel, and why are we making it out of steel? Steel is simply the commonest material in the solar system. Ah, thanks. Great, great. That's even better. Thank you. So, yeah, this is a radius of the ship versus wall thickness of the hull. Now, if you look at solar system resources, wrong way, that way, you'll see that you would, if you have access to solar system resources, then most of the materials for worldships are commonly found around the, so in the moon, Saturn's moons, Jupiter, Stony, all the materials are necessary for the hull, the atmosphere and the fuel, above all the fuel. Yeah, the fuel. Helium-3, by the way, helium-3 and deuterium. Very important propulsion thing because it involves less radiation, so it's probably the only fuel that we can envisage at the moment which will be possible to use economically. So coming back to this, assuming that you're going to make the hull of steel, you see people talk about why don't you make it of composites, why don't you make it of stronger materials? You don't do that. You make it out of real, we're talking ships of gigatons, so you just make it out of whatever is the most common material. And the most common material in the asteroid belt and beyond is things like metals like iron. So you use iron for this. So it just so happens that if you plot the hull thickness that you need versus the actual radius of the vessel, you have a kind of a knee in the curve around about here. So it is quite clear that something around 5-10 kilometers radius, in other words 20 kilometer diameter, will give you so 10 kilometers diameter gives you about a hull thickness of about 5 meters in Malaysian steel. Thank you, Alec. It's just what I need. That's now I can finish my talk well. So to build a ship of this type, wait a minute. Build a ship of this type, they have a hull thickness of around 5 meters. They are hundreds of meters long. You would put the propellant propulsion bay on the front. The propulsion bay is on the back, of course, the thrust structure. But most of the materials are located in the front of the machine for radiation, cosmic collision. These things. By the way, I'm not going to discuss in this talk. I'm just discussing the mechanisms. Clearly, any society that launches these, and I'm going to come to what sort of society would launch them in groups, because there will be failures, of course. Let me just go back and remind myself that I was All right. First of all, let me talk about the assumptions that we're making. The last speaker, the writer was talking about there are nobody else out in the galaxy. I quite agree with. One of the assumptions is that, first of all, faster than light travel is impossible. So all of the stories I'm reading, this is my current bedtime reading. Paul Anderson's view of the universe, and it involves faster than light travel. We cannot make that assumption if we're physicists. We don't see any way to do it. So this is talking about reality. We're not making any assumptions at all, or guesses. So we can't have faster than light travel. We do assume that mankind will spread out across the solar system. So one of the basic assumptions is that we do manage to make it into space permanently, as you were saying, sir. We have to make it into space permanently. And there is no trouble for about 500 years, because we need stable cultures. So in order to, the culture, if worldships are going to exist, then there must be no faster than light travel, solar system economy, wealth increasing at a steady level. 500 years ago, the concept of building a car would have been impossible to Leonardo da Vinci. Absolutely, he couldn't have done it. Even though he could draw it, he couldn't do it. I'm not Leonardo da Vinci, but I'm actually drawing worldships without being able to do it, not because of the concept, but because of the economy, because we can't afford to do it now. We don't have anything like the size of the economy, but with a solar system size economy, this can be possible. Also, any intelligent aliens will upset the apple cart and completely change the future in whatever it is. So we're assuming that we haven't discovered anybody else existing out there. Something which I subscribe to. I believe we live in a very universe, and the highest form of life out in the galaxy is probably scum. So we're the scum of the universe. Also, many target systems. Well, we can see that now. Also, I'm talking about Bond-Martin engineering principles. These are people who published in the British Interplanetary Society Journal in the 80s these diagrams and designs of worldships that I'm talking about. Alan Bond actually and Tony Martin are directors in a company called Reaction Engines, which you can look on the website, and is actually constructing a vehicle called Skylon, which is the answer to cheap, if it works, cheap ground-to-orbit transportation. I believe they've solved the problem. It's clearly just a political problem from now on. So the technologies, or the technologies have, that was the wrong word, the cultures we need exist in residential cruise ships. I'll come back to this concept when I'm talking about how it will happen. The last two assumptions are not really assumptions. What these do is make it easier. If we have longevity, genetic manipulation, hibernation, all of these, which can be simply envisaged, they're simpler to think about than faster than light travel. So these things could actually help in worldships because they make it easier to cross interstellar distances. And hibernation may be the key. And I'll explain what GCI is later. So let's, where am I? There, sorry. Oh no, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. That was my excuse when I gave this talk to the British Interplanetary Society, by the way. I haven't written anything down because I think it's impossible. It's too big a subject. That's what Socrates always said, by the way. And I'm no Socrates any more than I'm a Leonardo. But shall we say that just looking at things that travel between the stars without faster than light travel, you can go larger, slower, or smaller, faster. Project Daedalus, by the way, was to show that an interstellar, I'd like to look back sometime, anybody else can look at it, was to show that interstellar flight, it was an interstellar probe, cut-off velocity 14% of the speed of light, unmanned, so it was a simple probe. What we're showing, so that was a small fast, but if you have large and slow, you're talking about worldships, 0.5% the speed of light, not 14% cut-off velocity. And with that, you can more or less come up with ships about the size and shape I'm talking about. So, that's going backwards, isn't it? So, this is the introduction. I'll flash you through that. These are some of the early, people thought that you'd hollow out asteroids, and this is from science fiction book of 53. You know, lots of people living in peace. This is the type of shape that was visualized by Tsiolkovsky and Bernal and the others in up to the 20s. Clearly, they don't satisfy the type of either the engineering requirements, and it's difficult to see how they supply gravity, so on, so on, so on. What I define as a world ship is a ship that absolutely provides every condition that you have on Earth. You know, now, where am I giving this talk? Yeah, it's Moscow, and outside it's snow, right? if I had walked out last night, I could probably have died in the cold, right? So in my flat, I am living in an artificial environment. I am not living in the real world. The only reason that us human beings are living here is because we live in an artificial, controlled environment. And our desire is to control it more and more. I mean, I'd like air conditioning in my flat, you know, so I can control that part of it. I've got air conditioning in my house in London, you know, so I can completely control my environment. I actually grow plants in my garden, and they're all in greenhouses. Otherwise, my geraniums would have died, you know, this year because of the frost in London. All comes from Moscow, all the cold. But you know, I'm living in a completely artificial environment, and the further we go down to civilization, the more we are. My friend, one of my friends, is at the moment cruising around the world in a ship. He's spending 3 months cruising the whole world. He's retired. He spent his money. They're living in a kind of a flat on a ship, and they travel around. There are ships that you can spend several million and buy a flat on, and spend the rest of your life cruising the world. Even now. So when we conquer the solar system and we're living on Mars and Venus and all that, or orbiting Venus, asteroid belt, people will be providing artificial environments with gravity, with air, with plants around them. In other words, worldships will exist as habitats, as people talk about, in the solar system before you actually need to go interstellar. So let me just now, wrong way, beg your pardon, I keep forgetting to close the computer. These are the publications I'm talking about, by the way, in the British Interplanetary Society Journal. So you only have to look up the website of the BIS to get this, and then you can look up the references to the journal. Let's now come on to some discussion. So anything that was sensibly said has already been said. So worldships as a concept are already designed. Now the question is, I want to test this idea. Is the idea of worldship going to change? Are we going to invent anything? Because I'd like to say that when they dig up a spade from ancient Rome, it's still a spade. You know, you can't improve on that design. They build up, they can dig up a set of a vase, a flower vase. They can dig up a set of doctors' implements, and believe it or not, all the instruments that a Roman army doctor had were unchanged right up till 100 years ago, without any change. So the question is, have we now thought of how mankind is going to go? Is this concept rigid? In other words, is this concept fixed? Basic economy, the basic assumption is that the world economy, we don't go down into the end of the world. And actually, I tend to believe most people, the head of the Royal Society and the Astronomer Royal, Sir Martin Rees, actually gave a talk which I listened to, very interesting, called Our Last 100 Years, which means we've got 100 years to go before we have a computer revolution, all the things that were being discussed earlier in this room, computer revolution, all sorts of, disease, war, something can wipe us out, right? So, but if we assume that we're going to survive, then we have to discuss that worldships probably will happen. And all we have to do is discuss, will the worldship evolve, or is it more or less, are we visualizing right, and who will do it? Why will worldships be done? So let us just, wrong way, okay? So the evolution of the idea. I'm going to skip through this very quickly because I've already mentioned it. Is our view, let's leave that. Let's just come quickly on to what I've said. Let's just say, I'll discuss how we view the future. And basically, there was the steam age. We've gone through, if you like, a scientific communism age. we've gone through a kind of an age of worry, Cold War, if you like, and now we're beginning kind of a very funny age where everybody's kind of trying to survive, I guess is the way to put it. Victorian age, believe it or not, satellites were proposed in the Victorian age. Is a illustration from 1869, Brick Moon by Hale. And by the way, the leaders of intellectual thought who were pushing this, very interesting, H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, and goes back. But there were, you know, this cosmic view was formed then. And then, as I said, the I call scientific communism ages, the age of the kind of worldships were envisaged by Bernal as a natural expansion of mankind, and the sort of thinkers that were reinforcing this idea were here. People who can't. Some of these people, like Stapleton, you may not have heard of, but I believe he was one of the greatest visualizers of the world, and actually, for your information, drove Arthur Clarke and many other of that generation of writers into their visions of the world. Just to show you the way the world was pictured, Metropolis, 1926, an American film, Just Imagine, one of my favorites, very funny. The man wants to win his girlfriend back, so he goes to Mars just to prove he's a hero. It's really good. I wish I could do that. It's really good. And then now we're in the, perhaps, this is the Cold War period, which is paranoia, but still, this man, Shepard, just died, I went to his funeral, was the first man to write papers on nuclear-powered flight, nuclear-powered space flight. Val Cleaver was the first man to develop advanced rocket engines. People in Russia think they did that with closed-cycle rocket engines, but the first was invented by Val Cleaver. I'll explain that. It was peroxide kerosene. We can argue that much later. Then in the future, you know, this is how things are going to go. These are shots from Star Wars. So this is how we expand. But what happens after that? Well, as we expand into the universe, we're probably wondering where we're going, and it'll take until about until about 2,500 before the solar system economy is big enough to afford worldships. At that point, what will happen is that the solar system will be filled with space habitats, people living in space habitats, right? So all it then needs is some motivation to drive these space habitats outwards into a sort of a cosmic cloud. I rather visualize that in 500 years' time, mankind, if we have survived, will kind of wash out into the galaxy rather like spores wash out of a mushroom. You know, we kind of go. So why worldships? Why worldships happen? First, Tsiolkovsky and Goddard visualized it as saving the human race. I think that's fine, but I don't think that's one of the real reasons it's going to happen. The Malthusian pressure by Bernal, Haldane, people like this, they saw it as an inevitable expansion of man across into the galaxy. There has to be some sort of push. So although they're correct, it's not absolutely correct. I believe there has to be some actively driven idea. What is that actively driven idea? Oh, by the way, this is from Dan Dare. I'm going to skip all of this. There is one of the things that formed my field was the Eagle comet, and Dan Dare, written in the 50s. That started in 1950. This was written about 1953 or 4. It's a space ark, as Tsiolkovsky would say. So worldships began to be thought of as soon as we could. It's very funny. Most ideas happen when they end. In other words, when it's steam engine time, people invent steam engines. If your base is good is high enough to do it, almost all technical innovations are inevitable. Is an opinion behind this. Let us just quickly, therefore, talk on the most interesting subject, who would sponsor Worldships? Because I've only half an hour, so I've got 10 minutes more and then we can answer questions. Who would sponsor Worldships and why? As I've said, when it's steam engine time, people build steam engines. When you've got the metallurgy, the motivation, everything, you need clean mines of water, you've got metal, you've got wealth, you start suddenly thinking of ideas to do it and you went steam engines. In other words, you need materials, energy, information, motivation to kind of any technical stage we do in civilization, this is the way that you go. It will happen whatever happens. We can't see what it is, but it will happen. So in 500 years, we have a solar system with many habitats, people living in environments around the solar system. You know, different closed environments, all sorts of different ones. There'll be bunches of rebels who are mining the asteroid, who are trying to ignore governments and act on their own. There will be rich people living in vast worldships, you know, which are tailor-made for their thing. By the way, Berezovsky died in an estate, a closed estate on Earth, outside London, in which there were 350 houses, 100 were owned by Russians. The average price in this closed estate, policed, was 7 million for each house, by the way. So don't think there are not rich people on the earth who can afford to cruise around in their own closed environments, right? Just thought you'd like to know that. And by the way, I'm willing to collect a theory from every one of you on how Berezovsky died and who killed him, but that's later. So, just to remind you of the assumptions we're making here, that there is no faster than light, solar system economy, wealth increasing steadily. So, and the previous things I do. So, first of all, what threats are there to Worldships? It's not really long term, that's a mistaken title. I must change this talk. What threats are there to Worldships? Well, we don't know what interstellar space has. One of the problems is how full is it of rubble and thing. I mean, these things could collide. Colliding at 1% the speed of light into an object just wipes out the starship. You know, it doesn't. You don't. So actually, that's a thing. But it's calculable. We will know what the risks are. So I'm assuming the risks are low. And Project Daedalus. Is gravity necessary? I think this is going to be an irrelevant question, because I think all colonies and the type of people who go will automatically want an Earth-like environment. Radiation. Very interestingly, it's no problem. I told you that the Worldship hull, to give Earth gravity, would be 5 meters thick. That thickness of steel shields you from nearly all the radiation in the cosmos. So, actually, to simulate Earth normal radiation environment, you would have to introduce radiation into a Worldship to make it. This is a serious problem, but it's a serious problem on Earth. The Roman Empire fell, probably not through battling with Persia, but probably fell because there was a great plague around about 540, which weakened it badly. And there are, but nevertheless, I've got a lot of friends at the Institute of Biomedical Problems, and I believe that this type of problem can be addressed. I think this is the biggest problem, the social problem. Who is going to do a Worldship and why? What sort of society would it be? Now, I can tell you all that every year I go to an alien planet. I really do. It's called Utah, and on this planet, and I go to a small scientific conference. It's a conference on small satellites, and in fact I've been going 15 years. So every year for a week I go to an alien planet, because they talk differently, they think differently, and by the way, the people on Utah in Utah went there, the Mormons, they went there to escape normal society. They were living in a comfortable environment near the eastern seaboard of the United States, and they went off to a desert, to the Salt Lake, right, because they thought nobody else would want to go there, so they would be left alone. So don't think there are not crazy societies who can do amazing things. You know, this is quite interesting. But so the point is, what social structure? I believe that any religiously persecuted group that had the money, and the Mormons had all of that, would possibly colonize the galaxy. So the galaxy is probably going to be colonized by eccentrics, crazies, religious fanatics, and so on. Yeah. And I'm sure, by the way, there is a couple of other motivations, so rest easy. There's a couple of other things we've managed to think of. Clearly, survival factors are these on the society you meant. The problem is, and by the way, you're talking of flight times of thousands of years. Now, I do realise that a culture could preserve itself if it had hibernation. So you all go to sleep and you wake up and you're still Mormons. But if you are going to breed on the ship all the way and live a normal life, and by the way, that design of Starship, Worldship, the 200 kilometre, 20 kilometre, if you had 250,000 people in that, the population density would be about the same as rural France. So it would not be an uncomfortable society to live in. You could live in a nice environment. The problem is, over 1,000 years, I don't know any culture we've had so far that hasn't changed drastically. So they could start off as Mormons and end up as hippies, you know, by the time you get to the target star, you know? So I frankly am quite happy that they could all be Muslim suicide bombers when they start, and they'll end up as, you know, forgiving, whatever. You know, it doesn't matter. The point is that cultures will change. Clearly, the cultures that launch a world ship will want to preserve their culture. And so, because that's the whole purpose of going. So we can look at what they do, but these are the factors that will govern what they do. And so in order to preserve a society, the first thing we have to discuss is who we are. And I've heard some marvellous talks just a couple of hours ago in the previous session, where people are talking genetically, we're going to do this, that and the other. Genetics is not what drives us. A suicide bomber is not blowing himself up for genetics. He's blowing himself up for ideology. We are actually a component of three things: genes, culture and ideology. So we do not, so this is my invention, this is me talking now, I'm afraid, but I believe that we don't have a genetic factor, we have a threefold factor, which is what I call a GCI: genes, culture and ideology. I have been shocked many times I've come to Russia by cultural differences, you know, the way people see the world here. But I'm flexible enough, you know, to adapt to that, you know. But some people are not, and you've got to see how you build a society is going to be a component of these, and the most important will be the culture and the ideology. After all, that's why the Bible was written. The Bible was written to preserve the ideology of the Jewish culture. The Quran was written to preserve that thought. You know, these things are what we aim to preserve, not genes. People are wrong, but they all evolve, and societies compete. Communism only failed because it couldn't provide for the people, even though it said it could, it didn't. You know, and people here became poor because the distribution structure failed in some way. You can always argue why and how, but the point is it did fail. So it's they evolve and compete. So now there is some sort of different structure here, where people will see, and we will see if Russian society can win the world. I hope it does. I'm quite pro this. I'm pro any culture that believes in spaceflight. By the way, the fact you're all listening to me is absolutely amazing. I can't believe it. But there we go. So there we go. So we are this type of. We're looking at an evolution on this type, and clearly the people who want to preserve their cultures will want to stop this evolution and preserve what they've got. I would like the Starship to have. I would like to have people who were not interested in football, who were interested and so on my Starship, and my Starship, if I was a billionaire like Howard Hughes or something, or Gulbenkian founded a museum and people found societies with I'd found a society like that and sponsor a worldship in 500 years if I had the money, you see. So, and they'd all speak English, I'm very sorry about that. As well, you see. So this is what I'm trying to arrive at. So, oh yeah, a very interesting quote. I think but a guy in Arizona said, if there was a new age, we change our culture by switching from air conditioning to central heating. Very simplistic view of the world. You see, you can die very quickly if you have the wrong religion, is what I'm saying. Perhaps it's too difficult. But so it's our GCIs, not our genes, that drive us. I'm quoting the guy who wrote the book Selfish Gene. So what do we do? Do we eliminate? So if we're trying to preserve, this is a typical problem, if we're trying to preserve cultural ideology. For my crimes, I've had 3 partners in my life, and the second lady I lived with was a psychiatrist. Completely mad, as all psychiatrists are, but she taught me more than anybody else ever taught me, which was, we discussed what the function was of psychos, people in society. Because, strangely enough, if you look at the psychological makeup of any society, Eskimos, Hottentots, Russians, English, anybody, French even, you arrive at the fact that 1% are psychopathic. Now, surely they would have died out if they were not pro-society. And manics, they're probably 10%. People who I'm a bit manic, otherwise I wouldn't be up here talking with you all listening. But schizos, what are they for? What are these people for? Because in any human society, they should, if it survived, they should have been bred out. So the question is, do you have a perfect society where you eliminate psychopaths, or do they have functions? You've got to think about these problems before you design a society on a worldship. Right? It's a important problem. As I said, my worldship would have a Dandare society, no sport except skiing, huge physical libraries, dinner parties, pretty girls, absolutely. That would be my worldship. See, that's the way I do it. But you see, clearly that competes with everybody else's idea of a worldship. But I might settle for with they speak English, play cricket, and have real ale. That'll do. So, what are we trying to preserve? That's what we've got to ask ourselves. Are we trying to fix our culture? I was very fascinated by the guy earlier who said that cultures we will change genetically, because of course we change culturally all the time. So I believe there is a cultural pressure on all the time, at the moment. I never watch Top Gear because I'm not interested in cars. I actually have several cars, but I'm not actually interested in cars as objects, as things like some people are. So I can't talk to that sort of people. Does that kind of evolve, you see? Let me quickly come on to another factor. So how do we preserve it? Yes, we can preserve culture by, yes, I'll come to pyramids in a minute, but we can have fanatical cults will clearly try and preserve what they've got very hard. So we might want to, if we are going to get mankind across the galaxy, actually sponsor fanatical cults. We might actually want these crazy people who do things and offer them a starship and tell them to go off, knowing in our own minds that they'll change into hippies before they've gone 500, 100 years. So let's quickly look at, I'll be finished in a moment and we're going to ask questions. Just like to remind you that Aristotle said it all. There's really not a change. How do you construct a society to survive on a world ship for any period of time? The most stable form is probably, by the way, the red ones are bad, the green ones are supposed to be good. This is Aristotle. I'm coming to an interesting factor here, because both Russia, an oligarchy, and America, a democracy, are both what he would call bad societies, by the way. So nobody's unique. In fact, he defined a benevolent, he meant a benevolent monarchy, a benevolent tyranny is the best. I mean, that was his view, and this was the worst, probably, in his opinion. He kind of had that view. But if you're designing societies, you should be aware of what you're after and not fixed on any particular religion or message. So let's finally come to the answer. Who were going to sponsor worldships, therefore? Well, arks. These would be refugees or predators with no home planet. These are people who've predated their own area and off. You've got to be careful of space arks. They're pirates. There could be a natural expansion. But actually, I believe the only way to do it would be driven projects. Now, the driven projects are quite interesting because what we're looking at now is a solar system. We're looking at a society 500 years in the future, lots of colonies washing around, everybody's living there. Oh, by the way, what's happened to the Earth? The Earth is either a rubbish dump or a theme park. It's one or the other. It's not anything else in the solar system economy. I'm not even sure whether there would be a central government of any sort, But let's just look. Two types of sponsor. When I talk about government funded, I mean whatever local government does it. Two types of sponsorship, from external pressure and internal pressure. By internal pressure, I mean some of the worldships will be full of people with a particular religious or cultural needs who will consider themselves victimized and therefore say, well, bugger that, I'm going off across the universe. Because if you're living on a closed society, there is no need to stay inside the solar system, except for kind of comfort and communication with other societies. But if you're going to isolate yourself from that, you might as well leave. So pressure such as victimization will probably happen. But what happens, why are government and private funded? What type of motivations are those? Let's just quickly look at those. Government projects, there are two types of government projects which would fund worldships. One are pointless projects, which is like the pyramids. Why were the pyramids built? Why did Hadrian build walls around the Roman Empire? Exactly. It was nothing to do with keeping out the barbarians. It was to keep the army occupied so they didn't cause trouble. Exactly. So governments like big projects that keep people occupied and don't cause trouble. So, some vast Labour government, I can imagine it being British, says we're going to build worldships to do things. There'll be all sorts of things put on it. It'll be rubbish. The whole idea is to keep people occupied. There is also the other way, the alternative, which is Britain, of course, had Britain is the nearest country that's come, or I should say England, since Scotland's going to be independent, is the nearest thing that's come to an interstellar society, because we fought a war with a superior alien civilization, the United States, over a 3,000-mile range with sailing ships, and we could have won. The buggers got independence, but that's too bad. But we could have done it, and the point was that we thought global. So we put a prison colony on Australia and we sent people off there. So another government motivation is to expunge undesirables. So it's a great thing, you can say, off you go. You know, but let's have a look at private means. Well, clearly there are rich, I mean, King Saud with these things might want to fund a Sunni Muslim worldship, you know, and off they go across the galaxy to spread the word. Clearly there are people like, as I said, Bill Gates has got billions. I mean, a Bill Gates living in 500 years' time would have trillions, enough to build worldships. He could say, well, we need to do this, let's sponsor a worldship. And all the people, first big since we're at a science fiction convention, the first big worldship science fiction story that I read, and really the best, was written by Robert Heinlein in 1940 or 41, Methuselah's Children, and they all know, although the worldship has lost its direction, they all know they were funded by the Harriman Foundation. So it's clearly this type of foundation has funded that worldship that they're off on. And then internal, as I said, there is a you know, this type of, oh yeah, sorry, the other thing was external victimization. This is the internal victimization that I was talking about, that people consider themselves victimized and then go. So, what sort of Earth, I just said, what sort of Earth will they leave behind? This is a story, 1952. Since this is a science fiction convention, I can draw nearly every illustration from science fiction. This is a marvellous story written by Pohl and Kornbluth, called the Gravy Planet. And notice that this is the future New York or something, and they're peddling cars, they've run out of fuel, everything. It's really a very good story, I would recommend it. So, if the assumptions given hold, then large numbers of worldships will be present in the solar system. There could be a lot of pressure to get rid of them. I believe that mankind will spread out across the galaxy, as I said, rather like spores grow out of a mushroom. And in fact, the aliens in the galaxy are actually our own. Because as we spread out, and another thing, why is the Fermi paradox so important? If you can visualize, just do a quick calculation, I'll do it for you in your head. Galaxy is 100,000 light years across, right? It's 15 billion years old. That means that at 1% the speed of light, the speed of a worldship, so it's 100 times, you calculate, wait a minute, 100,000 light years, 1 billion years you could cross the galaxy, colonize it. So worldships would flood the galaxy in only about 7% of the evolutionary time of the galaxy. That first of all tells two things. That tells, one, there is no life out there, otherwise they would have been here. Secondly, the whole galaxy, and what will happen is, as the flood goes out across the galaxy, round the ring of the galaxy, the aliens that we meet will be ourselves, because human society will evolve. North Korea already is about to bomb South Korea while we talk, because they have a totally different conception of the world than most of the rest of the people on the planet do. What do you think is going to happen to human society when we spread out across the galaxy? I think I'm going to... So, conclusions are, given a big enough economy, worldships are going to be inevitable. We may not be able to preserve what people launch ships for. The whole character, you know, will tend to, this is starship humanity, I think is the word there. And by the time, the Fermi paradox will be acute, because if in a few hundred years there hasn't been any sign of aliens, then we definitely are on our own. I think we are anyway. And of course, if alien worldships are coming the other way, they're not gonna have anything to do with us. That's the last thing. I think.
Could you repeat that one?
If alien worldships are coming, in other words, if alien worldships exist, they will not be sympathetic. You know. And so I think I'll just leave you with some examples from down there. It's in that one. This is the Red Moon, a planet piloted by bees. In other words, a world ship piloted by intelligent bees enters the solar system and practically destroys the world. I read all that in 1951, so I believe it. I won't bore you with these now, but these are it's in that which you can look at. So I think I'll leave it there. By the way, these are the heroes of the thing. Let me just show you the hero down there. There he is. He's what made me to get interested in the space business. Where's Dan? They're all serious people discussing things. Oh, there he is. Don't forget, in those days, by the way, I believe space will be colonized by some people who look like the RAF with uniforms that look like it. He's got a Batman. There's a professor that tells them everything, who's a lady, and that's Dan Des. And this is the controller of the British Space Fleet. So, leaving that to one side, I was going to say, I think that reaches the conclusion of what I'm going to say. Remember, keep watching the skies. That's the final words in the science fiction film from 1950. The title will come to me in a minute. GCI is important. I don't think anybody else has been thinking about that, and it will apply to other cultures coming to get us. Other world ships will be competitors, and our only hope is that we're the first or early. I only hope that's true. Thank you. I have my colleague here who will help with questions if you need to speak.
Is that an official point of view of European space?
No, I forgot. Nothing to do with the European. That was put in. Yeah, that was a mistake. Nothing to do with the European Space Agency whatsoever. I deny all connections. In fact, I don't want anything to do with Europe at all. Actually, being British.
What have you done?
My company is called.
В 2008 году такая же ошибка была в программе.
Yeah, my company is called Commercial Space Technologies. We've been present doing business in Russia since 97. We broker the launches of satellites. We've done 30 satellites.
Наша компания в России
We do. Kostya is the chief of our consultancy. At the moment, we're working with Russian advisors, one of which is down there, for the British government. Providing a consultancy opinion on whether a British spaceport is necessary.
Финансируется правительством.
So I'm thoroughly, completely British.
Разработки бизнес-плана по созданию космического порта.
Not European, nothing to do with these.
Yeah, right. I just wanted to ask. You said that there are probably going to be sold the question of cheap space.
But launches to low Earth orbit. Yes. Skylon promises 12 tons for $10 million to LEO, a single stage to orbit space plane being designed by Alan Bond, the man I mentioned. I would advise you to look at the website for reaction engines, or just Google the word Skylon. S-K-Y-L-O-N. Skylon was the name of a display device used at an exhibition in London in 1951, which was the 100th anniversary of the Great Exhibition of 1851.
Jerry, I can answer in Russian. Проект Skylon достаточно интересный.
Thank you.
Он как бы произвелся из более раннего проекта Хотов, который в свое время разрабатывался. Это практически та же самая команда, которая разрабатывала проект Хотов, который финансировался государственным и так далее. Когда это финансирование кончилось, через некоторое время они возобновили свои работы с причастным финансированием. Цель создания одноступенчатого космоплана, который может взлетать по самолетному, выходить на орбиту и опять же садиться так. Таких проектов было, простите за выражение, чертова уйма. Но здесь, значит, есть определенная изюминка. Изюминка заключается в том, что они применили совершенно необычную концепцию охлаждения охлаждающего воздуха на этапе разгона. Да? Там очень сложная схема, это надо отдельно действительно объяснять, с промежуточным охлаждением гелия и так далее, но она обещает действительно некоторые успехи. Сейчас они получили дополнительное финансирование, как из частных источников, оказывается, патриоты есть не только у нас, не только в Штатах, но еще и в Англии тоже. Получили определенное финансирование из госбюджета совершенно недавно, относительно. И вот испытали недавно вот это вот самый воздухозаборник. Другой вопрос, я как инженер, который много занимался этой же проблемой, для меня кажется, что это несколько переусложненный вопрос. Но это второй вопрос, потому что это техническое воплощение. Сейчас они, в общем, идут достаточно успешно к реализации. И вот этот вот космоплан, который достаточно большую полезную нагрузку сможет вот за один полет выводить и возвращать, и так далее, он действительно может проложить путь в будущее. Но при одном условии, это опять же лично моя точка зрения, хотя она подтверждена уже достаточно многими историческими примерами, начиная с шаттла, кончали более поздним проектом Worldships американским, когда многоразовый космический аппарат доставляет, грубо говоря, 20 тонн на орбиту и может доставить примерно столько же назад, он никогда не будет выведен до тех пор, пока грузопоток на орбиту и обратно не будет почти равным. Так или нет? Я тоже вот с ними работаю, с ними знаком, я говорил, что на этих кораблях уже дважды натыкались. Но они рассчитывают на то, что вот если действительно эта идея уже будет развиваться в том плане, что развитие космической экспансии человечества, тогда этот вопрос будет снят самим собой. И тогда действительно этот проект, который сейчас наиболее близок к реализации, он действительно может проложить дорогу. Если у кого-то есть более подобные технические вопросы, то да.
Человек теряет кальция, как они собираются с этим бороться. Человек в космосе теряет очень много кальция.
Каннибализм.
Значит, это вопрос не ко мне.
Could I say that in the future I'm quite willing to talk if I'm present, if I know about РосКons enough in advance. Myself and Kostya were at one 10 years ago, and we occasionally come. I'm willing to talk on Skylon and anything else. I'm not part of the project, by the way. It's my friend who runs the company. But Skylon is one of the just one of the promising ways to get to low Earth orbit, which will make all I've talked about possible. But I can talk on more grounded subjects. And the reason I put this slide up is that I've never published anything on this particular subject I talk about because I think it's so complicated that I don't. Every time I try to write something down, I can see the difficulties. All I've tried to do for you is sketch the problems, and one of the problems lies with how you design cultures to go into space. Thank you very much, everybody.